Okay. They sacrificed a really dope ending for one last scare. I did enjoy it. I enjoyed playing it. I enjoyed streaming it. I didn't think that it was anything outstanding, but I kind of understand why they made some of the decisions they made. You had this very like linear, like they clearly wanted a linear experience, and maybe it has to do with the fact that resources were kind of scarce in the game. That makes sense to me. The dodge mechanic that so many people complained about, that so many people didn't like, I can kind of understand that because, and I talked about this a little bit earlier in the stream. You're in these tight linear levels, and if there was a dodge mechanic like say a roll or like a sidestep, there would probably be so many times that you died because you accidentally rolled into a wall. You accidentally sidestep into an obstacle in the level. Because the camera's pretty tight up on Jacob, you know what I'm saying? And I don't feel like, I feel like the dodge mechanic on paper was a good idea, honestly. But I think it kind of, for some people, oversimplified the combat. And I think that to try and combat that, they throw multiple enemies at you in certain parts of the game. And then that pissed off a lot of people because clearly the dodge system is kind of meant for one-on-one combat. And when you're facing 2 or 3 enemies, you end up like, there's like an auto aim or like a snap feature with this game where you end up kind of locking onto the wrong enemy and then getting hit by another enemy. And it can be super frustrating. And I get that. I understand that. I think they kind of, with their game design, I almost feel like they kind of backed themselves into a corner a little bit in terms of gameplay. There wasn't a lot of variation with enemy types. Even though there's, like you saw, I never even used the schematic for the assault rifle. Because the way the game works, the way the game is built, it's built for that up close personal, like melee combat focused kind of gameplay, right? So the shotgun and your hand cannon make the most sense, especially once you upgrade that hand cannon. So I kind of feel like it's kind of like they were putting puzzle pieces together, but they ended up kind of like blocking themselves into a corner with the gameplay. And I feel like some people will overlook it, obviously, but I feel like other people will not like it because the combat does feel repetitive. There's not a lot of deviation. There's not a lot of variation in enemy types or combat type, you know, like combat engagements. A lot of them throughout the game end up feeling very similar. As far as the fear factor, this is not a scary game. They have one type of scare in this game. Well, I guess you could say, well, there's one type of scare, it's jump scares. And the atmosphere of the game, like the level design is extremely claustrophobic. The sound design and the soundtrack, the ambient noise, it creates tension. But I think in a lot of ways that's kind of at odds with the combat, because the combat is like so like in your face, like very like actiony, like very like melee focused, where you're just like having this constant combat. There's constant set pieces that I feel like make it feel like an action game. It kind of makes it feel like an action game instead of a horror game. And so like a lot of this game feels like it's at odds with itself, you know? Like the gameplay is at odds with itself. The gameplay is also at odds with the horror. The performances were great. The story was interesting and it wasn't bad, but the story, I don't think that it gets a strong emotional reaction out of the player because the characters aren't well developed. I don't know shit about the warden of Black Iron. Like, I don't know shit about him. I don't really know shit about that girl. And that really hurt the arc with her character. There's so many times where you get reunited with her and then immediately separated again, inevitably by a fucking catwalk. You get reunited with her and you think, okay, we're gonna travel together a little bit. Think Ellie and Joel in The Last of Us. So we're gonna travel a little bit together. I'll get like some insight into this character. Maybe I, as the player, can start to care about her too. But you don't get that. Every time you get reunited, you get separated immediately. And so you never really end up developing any care for her. You don't know enough about her to care about her until like maybe the very end of the game. And I think by then it's too late. The final boss of the game, it's really the same affair. You know, you don't really learn anything about him or have a chance throughout the game to build up enough hatred towards him for him to be like an emotionally impacting final boss, to be like a final boss that you really care about killing. I think the best thing about him as the final boss was, you know, that the actual boss fight itself was very tense, but it had some of the same flaws that you could say about the rest of the game. The entire last boss fight, dodge, he can't even do damage to you as long as you're holding left or right on the fucking stick. So, or back to block when he spits at you. So you dodge him, you shoot, you run and get some ammo if you need to. When the other enemies spawn, you grab them with the glove and throw them at him. You grab the obstacles around you and throw at him. It's just a very, like, even though like it's not like I killed him in 1 or 2 tries, but it wasn't hard either. And I think it's kind of interesting that there were multiple game journalists talking about how they had to, you know, the final boss fight was so frustrating that they quit the game. Or earlier in the game, there was a fight that was in such a close quarters that they quit the game, or they had to turn it to easy to beat it. I honestly didn't feel like this game was that difficult. And I think a lot of that came down to that same dodge system. You know, I feel like a little more complexity would have been appreciated, especially with the final boss fight, where that dodge, you can't just rely on that dodge, where if there was just a little bit more to the gameplay to make that a little bit more interesting, instead of just this like rock, paper, scissors mechanic that goes around and around and around and around for the full game. The story, I thought the story was interesting, but at the same time at odds with itself, because it's pretty obvious from the very beginning of the game that this is a prison that's being used for some kind of experimentation on the prisoners, clearly trying to evolve something, create something, whether it's the next step in human evolution or whether it's to create some kind of weapon. It's pretty obvious within the first hour of the game, but our fucking character doesn't catch on until the last like 15% of the game, you know, the last hour. And it kind of makes your main character look kind of dumb, which, you know, to be fair, maybe he is dumb, you know, to be, you know, someone in the chat said that maybe he just kind of is kind of stupid, or, you know, maybe in the story he had so much going on that he couldn't process. I still agree with what somebody in chat said, that after viewing some of like the holo logs and some of the data logs in the game, if he would have like made some comments about like those logs, or kind of acknowledged what the player is learning, because obviously the player is learning this information, it would have been nice to feel like our main character is learning that information at the same pace that we are, because now we feel like we're kind of like linked up with our guy, you know. But instead, in the last hour of the game, I kind of feel like he's a fucking dumbass, because it was pretty obvious in the first hour, you know. So you know, there were just things that like the level design and the atmosphere of the game creates so much immersion, but then the game pulls you out of that immersion constantly with different things that feel underdeveloped. And maybe there was a lot of crunch involved with this game. I saw somebody say it in chat. Maybe there was, you know, maybe this game just really needed another 6 months, maybe another year. I think that they could have done so much with it. Now, saying all of that, I think the performances were great. I think that the level designers still did a great job. It was very linear, but I think they did a good job with what they were working with. The artist did a great job. the graphics in this game are amazing. This might be graphically the most impressive game I've ever seen. It's definitely one of them for sure. It's definitely one of them for sure. I just feel like a lot of the game mechanics needed to be more fleshed out. And that being said, that's kind of one of the reasons why I hope this gets a sequel. Or that, you know, if this game doesn't get a sequel, I hope that, you know, this company keeps going and expands on what they've learned and what they've created with the Callisto protocol. I'm looking forward to their next game, and I mean that. So if I were to give this game a final score, it would probably be in the range of a 6 to a 7, like a 6 to 7. So maybe a 6.5 if you want to say that. A 7 is not, I don't think a 7 is too high for it. I honestly, I saw so many people shit on this game, and maybe it's because I was streaming it. I had a slightly different experience streaming it than like playing it. Like I could have beat this game in 2 days just playing it like here at home in my own time. But streaming it over the past like 2 weeks, you know, I've definitely had a different experience than what the average player is going to have. That's why, like, I don't really take, you know, any kind of rating system serious with this, because, you know, anybody that plays this, if they're not a streamer, they're definitely going to have a totally different experience than what I had. They're not going to have chat there and all these little, like, sidebars that me and chat have to distract and to liven things up. The game is repetitive. It's not fully fleshed out. The story is not fully fleshed out. Characters are lacking in depth. Combat lacks depth. The crafting system, once you figure out what weapons really matter and what weapons don't, the crafting system seems far less useful, and the diversity in the weapon set feels far less meaningful. But I enjoyed it. It was pretty decent. I don't regret playing it or anything like that. It was all right, you know? And I'm looking forward to seeing what the studio puts out next. And I'm okay with the fact that it wasn't really that scary. Like, it relied a lot on tension. Way too many jump scares, though. And I feel like if somebody played this game in 2 or 3 sittings, those jump scares would be so often that it just would not, you know, it just wouldn't have much effect on them after the first, like, 2 or 3 or 4. Daniel, I'm glad I didn't buy the game, but was more than happy to watch you stream it. I think that for a game like this, it had a lot of flaws, but it wasn't bad. I don't really feel like it was as shitty as people made it out to be, but I'm not hard to please. 9 out of 10 on graphics and visuals. Yeah, I mean, if the lip sync was a little bit better, and if it didn't have some of the visual bugs and glitches, I think that would bump it probably to a full 10. Wasn't that scary for adults, maybe younger generation? That's fair. I'm sure adults said that about Silent Hill when I was like 14 or 15. I agree, many parts felt repetitive. Yeah, Jean. Daniel, I think they'll fix the kinks and downsides if they're able to make a sequel. I don't know how much room there is for a sequel, but I hope this studio makes another game, and I hope that they, you know, take another swing at like this action horror genre, because I feel like they've got all of the pieces that they need. You know, if they just can put it together the right way, I think they'll be good, honestly.